Hello everybody, welcome to the channel and thank you for joining me for the second part of our two-part series on Cuirassiers. In the last episode we looked at what a Cuirassier is and which nations used Cuirassiers. So if you're not sure or you haven't listened to that episode yet, then I'll leave a link to it in the description down below, and I'd recommend probably watching that one first, because in that part we discuss what a Cuirassier actually is and which nations employed them. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at how they were employed on the battlefield, and if I feel that black powder gives an accurate representation of that, and does it really show their effectiveness on the battlefield, translated properly, in my opinion, onto the tabletop. So how were they used by the different nations? Well, the French used to mass them together. I said in the last video that they were used as a mailed fist, and that was very much the French approach. I also mentioned in the last episode that there was something of the medieval knight about them, and that certainly came through with the French. They were used as a mass charge, and they would concentrate a lot of force into a small area. So the Battle of Borodino, they were used to assault the Russian flèches, they were known as, Fleischers, I think, which were sort of like emplacements. And obviously those of us who've seen the film Waterloo will remember they were used to attack the British infantry there. And this probably comes back from an event that happened very early in Napoleon's career in 1800 at the Battle of Marengo, where he had, the battle was turning against him. It was looking like it was going to be an Austrian victory. But then General Kellerman led the heavy cavalry to charge against the Austrians, basically the Austrians who were flowing through a gap in the French lines. They defeated the Austrians there, which allowed the French infantry to reform, reorganise, and then they went on the counterattack, winning a battle that was so pivotal in Napoleon's career that he actually named his horse Marengo. So that's how important it was in the career of the young General Bonaparte. And having seen this power, having seen what a Cuirassier charge can do, a massed Cuirassier charge can do, Napoleon often kept it as like an ace up his sleeve almost. It was a reserve to be sent in before he sent necessarily the guard reserve in, and they were used to either overwhelm the enemy or perhaps to stop them breaking through. Another example of where French Cuirassiers were used en masse was at the Battle of Aspern-Essling, which was a battle in 1809 in Austria, and it was basically the River Danube and two villages, and the area between the two villages was held by the Austrians. So General d'Espagne led his Cuirassier division, and he actually cleared away the Austrians from that area. He was killed in the attack, and after that it was made a rule that all generals should wear cuirasses. Now, you're a general, you decide yourself whether you want to wear one or not. There's not many people who can tell you to. But after the death of General d'Espagne at the Battle of Aspern-Essling, it was decreed that all French generals should wear cuirasses, and that was the level of protection that they gave. From a close-range musket ball, not much, but from long range or against a sword cut or something like that, then they were actually quite effective. Reputationally, the individual French Cuirassier actually had quite a poor reputation around Europe. The French were not particularly well known for looking after their horses, but compared to other more Central European Cuirassiers, they were viewed quite poorly. That said, what they had going in their favour was that there were a lot of them. As we mentioned in the last video, there were a lot more of them than there were of other nations' Cuirassiers. And that's really what helped them turn the tide there. They had slightly better cuirasses, because they had a front plate and a back plate, which was quite unusual. And there were just plenty more of them than there were of the enemies. So speaking of the quality of Cuirassiers, it was often seen that the best ones in Europe were the Austrians. They were mounted on large horses. They were, as we said in the last episode, large men, as they were generally, but Austrian horses were particularly well renowned for this. Now, the main difference between them and the French, equipment-wise, was that they didn't have a backplate on their cuirasses. Now, it helps save money. It also helps save the horse as well. You're halving the weight of that armoured breastplate of the rider there, so it creates a lot less strain on the horse. I'm absolutely no vet. I don't claim to be any expert on horses, but I'm told that the removal of a lot of equipment makes horses much more able to go for long distances without resting, and just add some extra time into their operational usefulness. The main issue that the Austrian Cuirassiers had, and it's the same with the Prussian ones, to a lesser extent the Russians, was that they were often used individually. Now, when it comes to Austrian Cuirassiers, there were a lot of men in a regiment, but that regiment would operate usually in sort of two parts, so they'd be divided into three squadrons in each unit, I guess you'd say. But that one Cuirassier regiment would operate on its own. So, they may have, for argument's sake, 1,500 Cuirassiers, which was double that of a French Cuirassier regiment. But the French would have 3 Cuirassier regiments, whereas the Austrians would only have 1. So that meant that, man for man, the French outnumbered the Austrians. So it's a little bit confusing, but the idea there is that the Austrians would operate one huge regiment, whereas the French would have 3 medium-sized ones there in the same area. So in black powder terms, you might have one large Austrian Cuirassier regiment. You might divide that into 2 medium-sized ones, and there's actually an option to do that in the Clash of Eagles book. But against that, you'd be looking for 3 medium French Cuirassier regiments as well. So they're going to outnumber those 2 units of Austrians by 3-2, and that's really where the French got their success. This changed in 1809 with the reforms of Archduke Charles, but by and large there wasn't much large-scale sort of mailed fist action for the Austrians as there were for the French when it came to using their Cuirassiers. It was a similar story with the Russian army as well. They would divide up their Cuirassier regiments, but it's slightly different in that they would often brigade them into heavy cavalry brigades, but with dragoons. So that gave them a little bit more flexibility. The problem there is that they then became a sort of jack of all trades and master of none. The way the French had it was, if you sent in a Cuirassier division, whatever was in front of them was getting trampled and getting out of the way. With a Russian one, you might say, well, they're dragoons, so they can do a bit of dragoony work, in which case the Cuirassiers aren't being used. Or they can say, right, well, we're going to do a heavy cavalry charge, which if you've seen my video on dragoons, I mentioned there that they were more than capable of doing. But if they were up against, for argument's sake, French Cuirassiers, then they might struggle there as well. So it's a nice idea. It makes a nice general use formation. But unfortunately, it means that you're not particularly good at either role. And I think that was a problem that Russian armies had. The Prussians, certainly in 1806, they didn't use Cuirassiers in the Waterloo campaign, which is a bit of a shame because they're quite cool troops. They're very good-looking models. There's not actually that many manufacturers out there that do them. But in 1806, the Cuirassiers were used, as I said in the last video, very much like they were in the 7 Years' War, in that they could almost have been on a different planet to the infantry. They were there to confront the enemy cavalry and sort of fight with them and drive off the enemy cavalry, which is okay, but it means that there's not that coordinated assault. It means that if a Prussian Cuirassier regiment charges towards some French infantry, for argument's sake, the infantry can form square. The Prussians are not going to have the infantry or the artillery to damage that square, so your Prussian Cuirassiers are just hanging about, waiting for the French Cuirassiers, who outnumber them 2 or 3 to 1, to come and slaughter them. Again, Prussian Cuirassiers had some of the best equipment, if not the best equipment, of the Napoleonic Wars. Great horses, there's great horse country over there in Eastern Europe. And, they really had the skills, the training, the ability to be man for man some of the best fighters of the Napoleonic Wars. It was more their command and control which let them down. And I think that's going to be a really interesting subject for a future video, is how important command and control were in Napoleonic battles and how that was really the difference between the success of the French and, say, the abysmal performance of the Prussians in 1806, or maybe even the Spanish armies in 1808, things like that. So it's I don't want to take away from the skill of the individual Prussian Cuirassier. It was more their system of war was outdated. It hadn't been updated from Frederick the Great's time, and it unfortunately let them down and left them a little exposed in the realities of what was then modern warfare. So having discussed which nations used Cuirassiers, we're going to get into the final part here. As you can see, this is a video that I've taken from a Russian film on the Battle of Eylau. So that was a battle in the Polish campaign, and it was fought in the snow. It's an absolutely fascinating battle. A lot of really interesting things go on there. But at the moment, I've found details a little bit sketchy to find, actually. So if you know any details of it, then please let me know or point me in the direction of any resources on it. How does Black Powder represent Cuirassiers, and are they represented well? Well, they get the Heavy Cavalry D3 special rule, so that's their first thing that you notice about them. And that means that if they're in combat with, say, Dragoons, they're always going to, at the very worst, equal their combat resolution bonus, or possibly even have 2 or 3 points, which should be more than theirs. If they're against non-heavy cavalry, so hussars, chasseurs, that kind of thing, then they're always going to get that bonus. In addition, they normally get more attacks as well. So French Cuirassiers will have 8 attack dice, whereas French Hussar only has 6, for argument's sake. So they've got that bonus as well. And that represents, I think, again, the weight of charge, the sword that we looked at in the last episode, things like that. In addition to all that, they also get a +1 morale save as well. So they're normally saving on a 3. So, by and large, I think they do represent them quite well. Certainly their fighting abilities. There is something that I want to talk about, we'll talk about at the end, which is a downside to Cuirassiers, which I think could be represented and currently isn't. But for their actual combat prowess, yes, I think they're very, very well represented. I think Black Powder does a good job of differentiating them. One thing that I've been a little bit disappointed in is that there's no concessions made for troops who didn't have backplates. So a French Cuirassier, in my eyes, should have a bonus over an Austrian Cuirassier. It could be something like if there's a follow-up move, so if they fight a second round of combat against the same opponent in a turn, then they don't get the +1 to their morale save for having a cuirass. Because instead of charging each other from the front, you're now sort of slashing and hacking to people's backs. Could also be if they're charged in the rear, then they don't get it. I mean, it's something like that. But rather than going to the specifics, I think either of those rules would really just add a little bit of a frisson and really differentiate those Austrian Cuirassiers with the French ones. Now, if you're giving the Austrian Cuirassiers a negative there, then I think it's only fair to give them a bonus elsewhere. And I think with this, one of the things with Cuirassiers that I've found in my research, particularly the French Cuirassiers, is they were basically one-shot weapons. They had one good charge in them, and that was it for the battle. They were very, very heavy men on big horses. These were not like race horses who could gallop up and down all day. These were horses who had one massive charge in them, and then after that they were blown. The British Heavy Dragoon Cavalry were similar. That's why they got cut up at Waterloo. Slightly less so, because obviously they weren't as heavy as our French or European heavy cavalry with the cuirasses. But even so, they had one decent charge in them, maybe the breakthrough, and that should be it. Now, there are rules out there that do simulate this. Shako 2 is a very good one. If you have the pursuit move in Shako 2, your cavalry become blown, which means that they can't charge until they've rested for a turn. I would really like to see something like that in Black Powder. I'd really like there to be a risk-reward system for following up with your Cuirassiers. So you fight, you win the first combat, you get to do your breakthrough move. I think if you move forward into another combat, that's fine, but you should either become disordered till the end of your next turn, or have some sort of special rule. Blown would be a perfect rule for me. I think disordered would be a little bit too harsh, because it also gives you the morale penalty as well, and it would mean that you couldn't be, for argument's sake, rallied in your next turn. But I think some sort of extra special rule, blown, would be an example. That would be the name I'd give it. You know, if it works in Shaco 2, why change it? And that would be that in their next move they can't charge, or they don't get a charge bonus, or something like that. Something that's really out there to show that they're a one-shot weapon. You know, over time they can get back into the fray, but really you want to save them for that crucial punch. Now you could say that the Austrians don't necessarily have to wait so long, or they don't have that rule because of their lighter cuirass. I don't think it actually made that much difference in the time frame of a battle. When you're marching and it's over a month, then yes, I think it probably has an effect. Over the space of a couple of hours, probably not. So it would be overemphasizing the effect there. But, you know, Black Powder is a fairly simplistic set of rules, and that's to its credit. And I think if there were introduced a rule such as this, just to make it, you know, like I say, a risk-reward thing, a thing that you want to save the Cuirassiers for that vital charge, then I think that would be a positive thing. Let me know in the comments if you think it would or not. I mean, I could be wrong. But that's the end of the video. Overall, I think Black Powder does an excellent representation of Cuirassiers in the game. So thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you can share it with members of your Wargaming club or a group of friends or anyone who you think might get something out of this, please do, because it really helps the channel, and I much appreciate it. So thank you very much for spending the last two videos with me. And next week, we're going to have a special week. So I'm keeping it under wraps for now, but look forward to videos on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.